All right. Well, thanks for coming back to the Bigfoot Society podcast. I have the privilege of interviewing Mr. Lyle Blackburn tonight. Thank you so much for coming on, Lyle. I will start by reading a little bio for Lyle here. So it says Lyle Blackburn is the author of such books as The Beast of Boggy Creek and Lizard Man, the founder of the rock band Ghoultown, and narrator slash producer on many small town monsters films. You may have heard him as well on Coast to Coast AM and seen him on shows from channels such as Animal Planet, Travel, Discovery Science, Shudder, and more. So quite the impressive resume there, Lyle. Anything else you would like to add that you'd want listeners to know about yourself?
Well, that kind of covers the basic gist of it.
Yeah.
That's a good summary of it. So you did well.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So I'm super curious. What is, how all these superhero has as an origin story. What is the origin story for Lyle Blackburn? How does he go from however Lyle was, or maybe you've always been like this? I don't know. I mean, you're just honestly, you are a cool dude. And I'm curious, like, what's the road you got to being a rocker, a creator of a theme song on Elvira, a book writer for cryptozoology themes? I mean, how did you get there, dude?
Well, I mean, it was kind of a short road and a long road in a way, because as far back as I can remember, I just gravitated towards the subject of monsters, whether that was monster movies, and later became aware of cryptids, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, things like that. I read stories in elementary school. So I just loved all things having to do with that. And, back when I was young, it wasn't as cool to be a monster kid, and there wasn't as much stuff, and there was, it was hard to see any movies like that. So I can remember just very much being an outcast in that way, but I loved the subject matter and I didn't care. So as time went on, I developed a love for music and really more of just like wanting to be in a band. I loved Kiss, and I thought, that's cool. And I was kind of a quiet kid, so I thought that's a way I can be forward and loud without having to really speak. So I joined bands when I was in middle school, and in high school I was already in bands that were doing some touring and recording, and did that, for most of my life. That went on, as well as I just was talented with writing. So I read a lot and would write for music magazines and horror magazines, sort of in between touring and doing the band stuff, and sort of made a living, writing everything from software manuals and all sorts of stuff. And then later I was writing for the horror magazine Rue Morgue more than a decade ago. That's where I got the idea I wanted to write a book. And I thought, what is my favorite subject? And that was The Legend of Boggy Creek, a movie which dramatized sightings of a Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas. And I'd seen that when I was a kid, and it's pretty close to where I live. I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas.
Okay.
And that is about 3 hours away. So for me, that was kind of like Bigfoot in my home turf,
Totally.
And, so I really just fascinated that. I kind of had that southern feel, and it had a monster, and it wasn't just a movie monster. This was also seen by real people. So it was kind of the merge of those two things. And then I kind of went from a, mostly music, with a stage name Count Lyle, to now now I'm going to be a writer. Well, that's not a good name. So Lyle Blackburn was, a good writer name. So, started writing for Rue Morgue magazine and wrote the books, and that sort of quickly launched me into this whole cryptid kind of thing. And I was on Monsters and Mysteries in America shortly after my first book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, came out. And so everything I've done, including the music, always has a theme of horror or monsters, and it's just in my blood. So I kind of don't know any other thing. And you can see this is just a small part of my office.
It is.
The whole office is like this. And in fact, my whole house with horror toys and Bigfoot casts and, movie posters and what have you. So, I sort of got there in a slow process, although to me, I'm just still the same kid who loves monsters, so to speak, that I
So cool.
was, when I was 3.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, there's a really interesting video on your website where it's like you actually kind of do a sweeping tour around it's almost a museum. The stuff you have in there is like, wow, where did this guy get this stuff? Like, and I got some questions about that later, but it's like, man, there's probably some people that would be like you got the sweet collection, man. Hats off to you. Was there a moment when you realized that like, oh, I'm doing what I'm meant to do? Like it started to really click for you, Do you remember a certain moment?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, early on when I was playing music and I was in a band on Roadrunner Records, and we did some touring where, we toured all the US and Canada and Europe. And, when you get on stage and you get halfway around the world and people are singing your lyrics back to
Oh
you,
man. Yeah.
those are the times where you just like, man, this is crazy and cool.
Mm.
And that's one aspect. And then with the books and things, kind of the same thing. When people start coming up and saying, I read your book, I loved it, I had this experience and I identified with it, and I love the way you put me right there in that setting where, somebody saw a creature. It's that feedback. So there's been moments like that no matter what hard work there is involved, it's the readers and the listeners and the fans which affirm, like, I'm doing what I should be doing,
exactly.
Be damned the money or anything else.
Oh man, yeah. I love it. I love it. I'm curious. So Lauren, there's a quote by Lauren Coleman, and the gist of it is like he says, first you write the books, then the TV's shows come out. Was it a thing where you wrote the books first and then you got on the TV shows, or like it was backwards, or how did that kind of work out?
Yeah, it was the book was written first when I wrote The Beast of Boggy Creek, which came out in 2012, and I'd been researching it about 3 years before that. And it was literally about, I want to say, within months of the book coming out. Some of the shows that were early on, more than a decade ago, kind of getting this whole revival of cryptids on cable television going. Monsters and Mysteries in America was doing one on Fouke Monster, Boggy Creek Monster, called me up, and I'm like, well, sure, you can interview me about this. I mean, I've been on stage, so I was already sort of,
right,
interviews and being in front of a camera and such. And so that was the process. And I wrote the book literally just for my own, I just wanted to research and know about the case, what was true about
That's
it.
awesome.
How was the movie made? So I never really intended some kind of a path to get on TV or anything else.
Right.
It just happened. And of course, they bill you as a Bigfoot expert or whatever it is, but it's like, I never said that. I just research and then I answer the questions, it's
sure.
But heck, you can't turn down that publicity because you get on a show and then suddenly
that's true. Yeah.
Sells. So good.
Talking about, since we're talking about that book right now, what was kind of your research process when you were putting that book together? What kind of other things were you looking into in order to get all this info together in the book?
I gathered up what I could find on the internet of newspaper clippings that dated back to some of the seminal sightings in the early 70s. I had seen the movie over and over. In fact, I used to sit in the tour bus while the other guys were in there drinking, and I'd watch The Legend of Boggy Creek, and they thought it was
so
nuts.
Cool.
But when I started researching, I thought, well, Fouke is not very far away, so I'm just going to have to go up there and just dumb my way around and start, meeting people and asking questions. So that's what I did. I just went up to this small
Okay.
town. There was a store called the Monster Mart, which at the time just had barely anything you could see.
Wow.
And I just started asking people, and that led to somebody saying, well, you should talk to this guy and then this guy. And then I met a few key people who knew a lot about it and had been there since they were been involved with as kids, and their parents were involved. And then I started sort of sussing out the whole story.
Yep.
So a lot of trips back and forth up there, going to the Texarkana Gazette library to get the old newspaper articles. And,
Oh yeah, sure. Like microfiches and stuff.
Yeah. So I kind of consider myself something of an investigative journalist, but one that will get out in the swamp, in the woods, and go to the places people see these. I'm in the library, I'm in some dangerous swamp next to an alligator. So it's sort of
I love that. And I think that's really what has to happen if you're gonna like put together a solid book or resource. You gotta do a little bit of both. I mean, it's kind of like you got Mark Marcel, the Ape Canyon guy, and he's in the library looking at the old newspaper articles, but he's also going to the cabin site. Like you gotta have both to get the book down. So hats off to you, man. What is your coolest monster item that you have in that room? What's like the number one cool thing? Is there a number one cool thing?
Man, that's really hard
It's
to
hard,
say.
yeah.
It really is, because not only is there a lot of stuff, but kind of spans between like toy monsters, and then I've got a lot of memorabilia from the Legend of Boggy Creek. I mean, one of the coolest things I have is a little Boggy Creek section over there where I have like a piece of a screen off of a window, and that screen was seen in the movie, the 1972 Legend of Boggy Creek movie, where they reenacted a girl's sighting where she looks out the back window and sees the creature coming up and looming in the trees in the dusk. And Charles Pierce, the director, shot the scene in the same house where the girl had the sighting. So not only is it you've seen in the movie, but this was the window that was the girl saw the thing in 1964. So the house is kind of dilapidated, and I got access to it, and there's pieces of stuff everywhere, and I borrowed a piece of screen that was
did a little Indiana Jones "this belongs in a museum" move. So
totally,
yeah, that's all right.
And that's some of the coolest stuff, because it represents both, to me, movie monster and real life cryptid, in something that you can't buy on a shelf. This is not something I can order and win on eBay. So that's some of my favorite stuff. There's Bigfoot casts, and of course I've got monster toys. I love Universal monsters. So Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I've got some of those items dating back to the 60s and 70s, which are hard to find toys. So some of those are some of my favorites.
Is there a one item that has been elusive over the years that you've been trying to find that has, I mean, I see you even have the Bigfoot from Bionic Man, that Bigfoot. I saw you have one of those in that video. That's really cool.
Television show, $6 million Man from the 70s.
See, I was like, oh, sorry. Yeah, no, $6 million Man. Totally. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's not my original, but I have a picture of me as a kid holding that thing. I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt, and I'm holding it.
Dude.
So I had it, and then of course I grew up only for a brief time in my teenage years, and somewhere got rid of it. But but yeah, there's a few things. There's some sort of action figures, if you will, 8-inch figures of Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, Mummy, that are from the 1970s.
Oh, cool.
And those are very hard to find in the packages, like in the boxes on the blister card. and I don't have all of those. And when you do find one, it's like ridiculous amounts of money.
I bet.
And then there's, you got to get the whole set, you got to get all the monsters. So that's one thing, one hole in the collection that I'm missing.
Gotcha.
But,
someday we'll get it someday.
It's fun to chase things down.
I know, right? It's hanging out in a Goodwill somewhere. You just got to find the Goodwill, right? It's there somewhere.
Right. If only I'd be so lucky.
Yes, sir. Are you excited for Godzilla vs. Kong coming out?
Oh yeah,
that movie. Yeah.
That's some of my favorites. I really love King Kong, and that's I'm a little more of a King Kong guy than Godzilla, so I guess I'm rooting for King Kong.
Oh yeah, well, I am too. But yeah,
I just love the whole idea of Skull Island, because somewhere in my mind that's kind of me. Like, when I go to a place like where Momo the Missouri Monster was seen, and I drive up to Missouri, and I'm out there by the Mississippi River and the bluffs and stuff, and that's my little Skull Islands, so to speak.
I love that.
Look for, at least talk to people who had possibly seen the creature and so forth. So
I'm just curious, when you're doing interviews, when you're interviewing people, do you tend to do you write stuff down, or are you doing audio recorder, or how are you just by memory, or what's your usual method of?
I usually use audio.
Okay, cool.
Mostly, I mean, sometimes if I'm out in the field, and sometimes I can just be somewhere, and suddenly somebody has a story. So sometimes I've had to write down notes, or try to get them to call me later. But I really like to record it, because then I get their actual quotes. And I find that I get a better story if I just kind of casually have a conversation and record it, rather than putting a video camera on them and making them uncomfortable. I'm not making movies, so it doesn't matter what they look like. I just want their honest feelings and their story.
That's good advice. So far, guys, gals who's listening to this, if you're like, there's been a lot of really good advice on how to do the cryptid investigative journalism. Hopefully you're taking notes on that. Like, that's been some solid stuff so far. Talking about your years, over the years performing in different bands, do you have a favorite memory you've had about performing in bands over the year? Anything that jumps out that was a really cool thing that happened?
There's a lot of them. One of my favorite times was when we were playing once in, I believe it was St. Louis, and we were playing in conjunction with a kind of a horror convention event, and they had all the cast of the Night of the Living Dead there. Whoa. And that's obviously a film that I had seen over and over, and loved that film. And we kind of made fast friends with Bill Hensman, that played the first zombie you see in the graveyard.
Oh, cool.
They're going to get you, Barbara. And then this zombie comes up. Well, that was him. And it was cool to hang out with him. And he was a really fun guy. And he, we showed him the band and stuff. So he actually got on stage and introduced us before we played.
Oh, wow.
And, there's just times like that when you're just like, how does this even happen? This is
exactly.
That was a cool one. And once we were playing in this upstairs, downstairs venue in Houston, and the Misfits were playing upstairs and we were playing the downstairs.
Wow.
And while we were playing, all of a sudden I see people pointing over. I look over on our stage, and there's Jerry Only, one of the members of the Misfits, the founding member.
Oh, wow.
We were playing a cover of Ghost Riders in the Sky, and he's literally over there on the mic singing. And
what?
I'm like, okay. And that was the first time I'd met him. We've since become friends. Wow. But his introduction to Ghoul Town was somebody running upstairs and go, there's some spooky cowboy band down there playing Ghost Riders in the Sky. So I ran down to check it out, and I just look over, he's on the stage. So those are times when again you just go, wow, how did I get here? This is cool.
How am I here, and how can I just, it's like you gotta enjoy it. It's so good. That is such a good story, man. Oh, what is the origin of the name Ghoultown?
Um, that came from, I had been in some heavy metal bands and done well with that, and then I kind of shifted back to kind of a horror punk thing, and then I was always trying to create something, my own kind of music that was um, very unique and different and recognizable, like the
Okay.
Misfits, one of my favorite bands, like they are, but not be like, I mean, not copy them, but
Right.
have my own thing. And I was writing. I wanted to put out a comic book, and I was kind of writing short stories and developing a comic book. And I had this idea for this post-apocalyptic Western kind of thing with kind of like ghouls and vampires and things.
Oh,
And
nice.
um, I came up with the name Ghoul Town for that. And within those stories, there was these saloons that would have kind of a mix of old and modern. Like there would be like a band actually playing in the saloon, and the band sort of was like Ghoul Town. and
Okay.
and then after a while of that, I thought, maybe I should actually start this band. um, and so then
That's
I kind
nice.
of switched gears from doing like in a writing or a comic book format to actually forming the band, and that was back in 1999. So
That's wild. Oh man, that is cool. Very unexpected. Um, if there's people that are listening to this and they're like, maybe like their dream is like, younger people, they want to like, let's start a band, let's travel around, let's tour. Do you have any advice for people that are thinking about maybe doing that?
yeah, I mean, the basic ingredients to getting somewhere with that kind of stuff is to first, you know, study other bands like the Misfits or whomever, Iron Maiden or whatever your bands are. Look at the ingredients, look at how they present themselves, look at their songs, and and you want to be professional. And then,
Mm,
obviously you need something that people like. And then the other ingredient is get it out there. I learned that early
mm,
on, back in the days before the internet,
yeah.
when my first band, Solitude Eternus, got signed to Roadrunner Records. We would just send out our demo tapes everywhere, like
Wow.
everywhere. And that got us noticed worldwide, really. We were in fanzines and other things before we
Oh,
really
nice.
had our first album out. And I learned from that, it's like if people don't know of it, then they can't become fans. So if you have
Right.
something good, you've got to get it out there. And of course, now we have the internet, so it's a lot more easy, although it's a lot more saturated. So, I do the same kind of approach with the books and things. I just get them out there, make sure, I do all the events I can,
Yep.
and send the books to get reviewed. And that always seems to work. If it's something good and you get it out there, then slowly but surely it'll start paying off.
Oh, I agree, and I think it's you have to be careful not to become lazy in this time of the internet. You need to have that same like go for it as you were talking about before the internet, where like let's send it to everyone. Like you gotta contact like crazy. Like if you're doing you know what you're doing now, or you're doing a podcast, you gotta work on it every night. So that is great advice, Lyle. Thank you. You have so many different ways of creating right now. You're doing writing, narration, music, all that good stuff. Do you have any of those that are more of a favorite for yourself, or
Well, I like the process of researching and writing a book, which is
mm,
why I kind of continue to do it. I mean, I had great feedback, but it was a fun process. And I think I'd never written a book before. It's because I always thought it was going to be boring. Like, what am I going to write a
oh,
book? I'm just going to
interesting.
lock myself in a room. I like the writing, but I like getting out in the field and meeting people, and all these adventures happen, and then I can write about them. So that's some of my favorite stuff, and usually that's governed, that's driven by just me. In the terms of a band, I've got other members, and there's a lot more
Yep.
logistics to doing anything. Although, my favorite part about that is being on stage. All the other stuff is work. But again,
Right.
when we were playing in London
Oh, wow.
a couple of years ago, and that was the first time we had played London itself on any European tours. And you're there, and again, the club is just overflowing with people, and they're singing your
Man.
lyrics. That's my favorite part. But there was a
Mm.
lot of work involved, obviously,
Oh,
to get
yeah.
that 1 hour on stage, all the other stuff. So
Oh, that's cool.
work.
Speaking of music, I'm always interested. Do you have what's in your rotation of what you're listening to music right now? Do you have any favorite albums you've been listening to as you work, or?
I've been listening to a lot of Wasp, the
Okay.
heavy metal band, which kind of became prominent in the late 80s, kind of in the hair band, but they were much
Oh, nice.
harder and heavier. And, I listened to some of their albums, but then I kind of lost track of it. And then somehow I was on Amazon Music and I started listening to some of their other stuff. And I was like, wow, they did a lot of great stuff I didn't realize. So for like a month, I just been listening to each Wasp album.
Oh, that's awesome. It's crazy how and it's not like I can even talk to this because I'm 37. So I can remember when the internet came in. I'm like at that weird cutoff age, right? But it's like I can remember when before iTunes and before Spotify, and now you have like Spotify now, and it's like, oh, I can bring up one certain band and listen to their whole every album they've ever made. Like it's mind blowing, definitely. Do you have a preferred way, like that you like to listen to music? Are you vinyl guy or just kind of however you can get it?
Just kind of however, really. I mean,
Okay.
I like listening to it in my truck, when I drive. I mean,
Oh, nice.
I can jam it out, high school style.
Heck yes.
um, Vinyl's cool. It sounds good. And, we've put some of our albums on vinyl
Okay.
over time. And, it does definitely it has a superior sound. I definitely don't like really compressed MP3s. A lot of people's
Mm, interesting.
what they're listening to is a bad quality version. But if I can play a CD or a better source file or
Okay.
whatever, then that's the best way. But I'm not too picky. I'm not like I'm not like some of those people that want a pristine vinyl and that's all they listen to or whatever. I
Oh,
just
yeah, I got you. Yeah,
I do
totally.
whatever.
Yep. Got a few of course, as you can imagine, there are some cryptozoology themed questions that came in when I put the word out that I was going to interview you. So, is there a plan for any future cryptozoology themed books down the line? Anything you're working on or keeping things quiet until or anything on that regard or?
I'm really not sure what I'm going to write next. I usually have it kind of mapped out, and I do have
Okay.
a good list of 5 or 6 books that I want to do. And
Nice.
I released 2 last year, so I kind of worked
Oh, wow.
hard, and
Yeah.
um, I I've got a good response to my book Sinister Swamps, which
Mm-hmm.
covers geographical locations. And in that, I don't just cover cryptids. I just covered whatever weirdness that people had reported or legends associated with these swamps, kind of, those primordial spooky locations that we all kind of think about. Um, and and that seemed to get a good response where I just covered more than just cryptids. So I was trying to
Okay.
debate, I guess, between doing one of my books like where I focus on one narrow, small cryptid case, or do I go bigger and talk about regions and more weirdness, kind of like I did in Sinister Swamp. So it seems like the more books you write, the more you're like, oh no, what do I do now? Because the possibilities are bigger, and you've learned so much
Yeah.
about different stuff that I would like to, people always ask me about writing a book about dogman or werewolves and
Oh,
stuff like
dude.
that. So
Yes, totally.
that that that's high on the list. And
Yeah.
there's been some great books. That's one thing though, is I've got colleagues like Linda Godfrey,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
um, Beast of Bray Road, and
Yep.
she's written several books along those lines. And so I don't want to stomp on others' research or toes. If I do
Sure.
something, it needs to be something that is my angle or my unique perspective, or if I've gotten enough reports of dogmen that haven't been made public, well, I've got
Definitely.
something to offer. So that's another thing, is just getting enough reports of one type to where you go, well, this would make a book, because you don't want to sort of, you want enough material. You're not to make it interesting. So I'm still just trying to figure out.
I can tell you that so doing this show, you definitely start to see the trends. And I would say that the Dogman is definitely, it's one of those where it's slowly becoming more popular and more popular. Um, that and the Snallygaster for some reason, but that's a different story. That's a weird one from Western Maryland, but um, that's really cool. Like that would be an awesome book. I'd be all about it, Lyle. Um, there's a question. So a few questions we'll start to put in here. So one from Bigfoot Anonymous on Instagram. Uh, what are your thoughts? Do you have any thoughts on the Ocheesy Pond wild man? Have you ever heard of that? I think it's a Florida thing, maybe.
That's the Florida one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I covered that in my Beyond Boggy Creek book. It's been a minute since I wrote that. To my, if my memory is correct, that one was very much described on the verge of being a wild man, a man.
Mm,
Um, a lot of those older stories were hard to tell if they were very accurate in their description and whether they were talking about something that was more ape-like, or were they just talking about a feral type person. Of
totally.
course, earlier in our country, especially after the days of slavery and wars and things, there
Mm-hmm.
were people who lived in the woods and
Mm,
swamps, and could be seen by somebody and interpreted as being covered in hair or
oh,
dirty or
sure.
whatever.
Yep.
um, but that one's an interesting case, and there is newspaper reports which talk about it, and in my mind, I'm not I'm not convinced that was a skunk ape, but I'm not convinced it was, definitely a man. So just,
Gotcha.
they're old stories and hard to make a solid judgment, really.
There you go. So Connor, check out that book to get some more info on it. That's good. Creature Kids Books on Instagram asks, "What's your favorite cryptid that science finally accepted to be real?" It's kind of an interesting question.
Um, well, I mean, I guess, there's not too many that have been
Exactly.
scientifically
Yeah.
accepted,
Yeah.
is the thing. So a lot of these were almost like they're cryptids, but weren't recognized necessarily as cryptids.
Yep.
So, like the coelacanth, which
Exactly.
was discovered in 1938, that's sort of the darling of cryptozoology, because that shows that to most, you know, uh, marine biologists and scientists of that era believed that this particular fish was extinct, and nobody had seen one for years and years and years until some fishermen pulled one up. And so suddenly it was like, wow, how come we haven't seen one of these before? Because if it's real and it lives in the coast of Africa, we
Hmm.
should have seen it. Why now? We thought this was an extinct species. So that's sort of what drives a lot of this, is that, well, there's an example of something that was creeping around in the sea that, we thought was gone, and here we have an example of
Exactly. Yeah.
it. And mammals are harder. I mean, you could say the mountain gorilla at one time in the early
Yep.
1900s was a
Yep.
cryptid. People said, "Oh, there's no
Yeah. There's no way. There's no way.
living
Well,
up there," and what have you. And,
yeah.
until that guy went up there and shot one and brought one down and said,
Mm-hmm.
"Well, how about this?" And everybody's like, "Oh, I guess there is gorillas
Well,
living up there." So,
yeah.
but those
Oh,
were
yeah.
not recognized. There was no Lauren Coleman didn't write a book on, mountain gorillas being cryptids, and then it was discovered. So that's a whole nother thing where
That's a good point. Yeah.
if if a Yeti was discovered, or if, somebody had a Bigfoot that they brought in on the back of a truck, or a dog man,
Mm-hmm.
that, would be the ultimate sort of cryptid become real, and would just, man, that would just blow people's minds, obviously.
That's like, it's such an interesting subject because it's like it it has to happen for science to fully accept it. I think, there has to be a specimen, but
Hmm.
do we want that to happen? I mean, I like Harry and the Hendersons, that I don't want Harry to be hurt, but I mean, if there's something we want it to be proven to be, it existed as well. So, um, all the weird from Instagram. Greg from Patreon, also Order 66 podcast, which is a great Star Wars podcast. He asks, if you could learn the undeniable truth about a single cryptid, which cryptid would you choose? So I would think you could have all the knowledge there is about this one cryptid. What would it be?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I, I mean, probably Bigfoot. I
Yeah.
suppose it's sort
Yeah.
of the one. Although that we seem to have the most knowledge of. So, you want to weigh that against, like, well, maybe I would want to know about Dogman, because it seems a little
Mm,
bit more fringe and harder to come up with any data. So
yeah.
I don't know. I might just go with Dogman on that theme, just because then I would be like, then I would suddenly be the expert on that.
That would be quite the book. Yeah.
Then I could write the book very well.
Yeah, exactly. Um, this next question comes up in multiple forms in different areas across social media. Can you tell us a little bit about your hat? People love your hat, Lyle. Like, can you,
Yeah.
is it a certain type, or nothing too
Uh,
special, or?
well, it's kind of a one of a kind. I got this
Oh,
in
wow.
Mexico back in, I believe, 1998 or 99, right about the time I started Ghoultown,
Okay.
and had the idea for the image of the band with the dark Western stuff. And
Mm,
I had another hat, but it wasn't quite right, that I used on, like, the very first promo pictures. And then I found this hat, because back then I'd go to Mexico every once in a while, and uh
nice.
and I found the hat, and it just kind of worked well. And then it became just literally part of the Ghoultown image, and became part of me, and was
Yeah,
part of
totally.
what I was talking about, how the band, suddenly I had a band that was um, identifiable with, from the image and the music, whether people liked it or not. People, we'd walk around, Texas, and in cities like Austin and Dallas, and people would say, "Oh, hey man, Ghoultown." They would just see the
Right,
black
right.
hats.
Yeah.
So it worked for that. And obviously, when I started writing books, I thought, well, do I even look like a book writer? I don't know. And then, I just thought, Indiana Jones, whatever. I
That's
just,
right.
I just wore the hat. So then it's almost to this point where if I don't wear it, people are like, "Where's your hat?" So I just figure, well, I'm just gonna stick with it on everything I do, even in interview. That way
You
I'm
have to. I
recognizable.
don't think, I think people would be like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" Yeah. So that's some
Yeah.
cool background info on the hat, man. Thank you. Um, the Next question is so we get some troll questions. So this one's a kind of a funny one, but Gordon Shumway on Twitter, by the name, you know you're in trouble. But are you really Ken Gerhard in disguise?
Well, that's a good question because
Oh,
you don't always see us in the same place at the same time. So could we very well be you know
that's
one and the
true.
same? But we always and Ken is also, it was funny because we play who had the hat first, because
Oh
that
yeah.
comes up. But Ken also is a singer in a band and had a hat and
Oh, is
wore it in the
he?
band. Yeah, I mean, we're very
Oh,
similar, even though
hmm.
like our album producer on several of our albums was his guitar player. But I didn't
Oh,
meet Ken till for a while, um, but it kind of convergent paths. And
that's
so
funny.
obviously we were like-minded in many, many ways. And we literally came up with the hats. And, we always try to like, hey, I got a picture of me at 3 years old wearing a hat, oh, I got one of me at
Mm.
2 years old. So it's literally, we can't figure out. We just sort of had the hats, and that was the deal. And we decided it is confusing sometimes, where you thought this is genius publicity, because whether people see me or see
Hmm.
him, they kind of think of both of us.
Oh, there you
So
go. Yeah,
it's like we're in two
it's great.
places at one time. We're covering a lot of ground, and so we just get a real big kick out of it. It's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. So speaking of you and Ken, can you tell me any info about the show concept you had that you can actually watch the episode American Monster Tour? I think that's very interesting. But do you have any info about that at all?
Yeah, that was something. We've both been on television shows, and we've
Hmm.
both been a part of uh, sort of these pitches by production companies to networks for getting our own shows.
Okay.
And, as one can imagine, the television field is fraught with danger and minefields and people who
That's what
don't
I
care
hear.
anything about the integrity
Yeah.
of our research. And we
Hmm.
have to watch out. And we always would say, a lot of times, if people would just put a camera on us when we're driving around together, we
Yeah.
can make a show out of it. We're interviewing people, and we're just down to earth. We're not trying to make stuff up or make anything out of anything. We're just investigating stories and sightings. And that's where the concept came from. We thought, well, what if we somehow could produce our own show, at least for the internet or whatever. Not necessarily that it would get picked up by a network, because then you'd have other people telling you what to do. So this was
Exactly right.
independent, but it's doing that and having any kind of a budget or the time to do it
Hmm.
is difficult. So we've done one episode, and American Monster Tour, the title and the idea with that was, we've both been in rock bands and we've toured around, we've done all this.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And while we do that, oftentimes, break off and investigate stuff. So we thought, well, why not kind of have creature investigations merge with this tour kind of thought, where we're going to the next destination,
That's
we're going to look
good.
into
It's a good
this, now we're
idea.
going over here. Um, and so we've done one called Demon Flyer, which is
Hmm.
sightings of pterosaur or pterodactyl-like creatures, particularly around Oklahoma and Texas. And that's out there. And we're working on a second episode called
Oh,
Cattle
wow.
Creature, about
Okay.
Bigfoot sightings in East Texas. Um,
Nice.
but again, it's not big budget, so it takes longer to do it.
Oh,
So
sure. Yeah.
ultimately, these are ending up on YouTube, where people can just view them for free. We've had some interest from production companies wanting to pitch it, the show, and trying to get
Hmm.
it more of an official capacity, but thus far, none of them have either been able to do it or want to change it. And then we just say, we don't like
Yeah.
the
You're like,
changes, and reject it.
right. Oh man. Well, yeah. I mean, it's a great concept. I enjoyed the episode. You can watch it. It's on YouTube. Definitely on your website as well. So I'll have that linked in the show notes. People can check it out. But man, if that could keep going in some way, I would be all about it, dude. It's really good work. Um, I'm curious, what's it like being interviewed on Coast to Coast AM? What is that like?
Erratic.
It's got, yeah.
It's
Oh
you know,
man.
it's the most recognizable, and it's got the
Yeah.
biggest audience, and great. But obviously, that comes with commercial breaks
Okay.
and all that sort of stuff. And whereas, like here, we don't have to keep stopping our thoughts. But that being said, I mean, it's a great platform, and you always
Oh
get
yeah.
interesting callers calling in,
Mm.
and you know, it's kind of a, I don't know, a distinction. If you know, I used to listen to the show early on, and it was odd because I remember some episodes where I listened to an author talk about his book, and I went out and got the book, and I remember an incident, and that was a book called The President's Vampire, and it was on
Okay.
Anomalous Books. Well, years later, Anomalous Books is who published My Beast of Boggy Creek. So
Oh
there again, it was like, wow, how cool is this? You know, I'm
yeah,
listening to Coast to
totally.
Coast, which I liked, and I bought this book, and now I'm on the publisher, and now I'm on Coast to Coast. So
Crazy.
those are the times where you go, wow, this, how does this happen? You know?
Man, that is wild. Um, I'm curious, how did you get the connection to write a theme song for Elvira? There has to be some story there.
Yeah. We Ghoultown was performing at a VIP party at a horror convention in Dallas.
Okay.
A lot of these horror conventions will have music and kind of spooky bands like ours.
Mm.
But in this case, it wasn't the full stage thing. We were playing acoustically at this party that featured the celebrities and stuff.
Oh wow.
She wasn't there, but her manager was, and he saw us and loved us. So, um, you know, I didn't meet him there or anything that night. Well, the next day we were at our table where we were at a guest table or whatever, and you know, she was going to be there. And this is when she was kind of starting to get back into the convention circuit and really
Mm-hmm.
resurging her branding. And all of a sudden, somebody says, Elvira wants to meet you. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay. I thought they were joking. Well, here she comes with her little entourage and the manager, and came
Wow.
over and said, you know, my manager's been going on about you guys. You know, your band sounds really cool, and I just wanted to come over here and see what you guys were about. And so, you know, of course, I shoved the other guys out of the way and said,
Yeah.
"Hey, let's talk."
Right. Yeah, let's talk.
And
Man.
you know, just in the course of conversation, we hit it off, and she said, "Well, maybe you should write me a song," you know. And I said, "Well, I could do that. I mean, I
Yeah.
was a fan of Elvira since Mistress of the Dark had been on the early television shows she had done and all that." And so I talked to her manager, and ended up, I came home and did a demo and sent them the song. They liked it. We
Nice.
recorded that with the purpose of her using it on her website or on some of her album releases where she does spooky Halloween songs.
Mm-hmm.
And the song was so good. We had a mutual friend who was directing music videos out in California. So we're like, why don't we shoot a video? So we ended up flying to Hollywood and shooting the video with her at a place called the Magic Castle. It's in
Oh
LA.
yeah,
It's
totally. Yeah, yeah.
historical, if you've heard of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so we were able to use that location. She came out. She's so super cool, and I mean, we filmed the video, and just a really fun project. Um, and so that was it. And so, you know, that just became another uh, milestone in
Oh man.
Ghoultown's music history. And then, you know, we became friends, and anytime we see each other at conventions and things since then, you know, we
How cool is
always
that?
get together to visit.
Oh, that's a good story, man. That's good. Um, as we're starting to get towards the end of the interview, at the end, I have the same set of questions that I like to get the answers from. You know, I always have very every episode is a different guest for sure. So I've got some ending questions to ask you. Um, what should I ask you that I didn't know enough to ask? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Um, I don't know. We covered a lot of stuff. maybe what is my favorite cryptid case? A lot of people ask that.
Ooh, okay.
But that's probably a predictable answer. It is the Boggy Creek
Right.
case, and that's always sort of my home ground. It's like, even I've written other books, but something about that still sticks with me, that it did when I was young. And I've gone back, numerous times, and I still get witness reports. And a lot of people ask, oh, there's still, sightings. Well, I just released a book called the Boggy Creek Case Book, which has sightings from 1908 up until just like a year ago, when I, finished up the manuscript. And so that's a case that keeps drawing me in over and over. Whereas some, like the Lizard Man book, it was just sort of, I wrote that book. It's sort of a capsule in time. It's a very cool kind of creature from the Black Lagoon kind of vibe, but
yeah,
it's not sort of that ongoing. So Boggy Creek's kind of the ongoing case that always draws me back.
That's awesome. If people have, how do people send you reports and stuff?
They'll contact me from my website.
Oh, okay.
Email, sometimes through Facebook, even Instagram.
Okay.
And then, a lot of things I get when I'm out doing conferences and things.
Oh yeah, sure.
Come up and say, well, I read your book. I like the way you treat witnesses and present the stories. And I'd like to tell you about something that happened to me.
Oh, wow.
Well, those are the best, because then I'm instantly meeting the person and assessing them as a witness, and getting to hear their story either then, or telling them to call me later so I can record it properly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So a lot of, getting out there and meeting people ends up, people will share their stories that I wouldn't have got otherwise.
Very cool. Is there a thing that you're most excited about right now? Could be anything in general.
Yes, surviving COVID and getting back to the point where I can do book signings and play gig and hang out with my friends and colleagues,
I get it, man. Yeah, 100%. Is someone getting into Bigfoot or cryptozoology? What are the top books that that person should have on their bookshelf right away?
Well, Cryptozoology A to Z by Lauren Coleman is a great, way to get up to speed on the various cases and the types of creatures. There's, getting into one certain thing, like for Bigfoot, you want to read John Green, Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us.
Yep.
Jeff Meldrum's Legend Meets Science is a good science approach to that.
Exactly.
If you want to know about Bigfoot in the South, of course, my Beyond Boggy Creek book. Then, for the seminal Dogman case, The Beast of Bray Road by Linda Godfrey.
Yep.
Well, and I mean, just say Ken Gerhardt has a new book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, which is a really modern, updated version for Bigfoot.
It's a super good book too.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good one that I need to add. Let's see, there's some Mothman books out there. Jeff Wamsley, who lives in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, has written Mothman books. There's a good one called Legend Tripping, which
Robert Robinson
has written.
I just interviewed him.
Gives you the kind of an approach of how you can make this fun to go research famous sites of cryptids and ghosts and UFOs, and that's a good one. Gosh, the list. There's just so many.
That's a solid list.
Cryptid books. John Kirk's Lake Monsters book is really good. Let's go get a copy of that. In the Domain of Lake Monsters.
Oh, okay.
That's really good.
Check that one out.
Really great in-depth information on various lake monsters. And I mean, whether you're reading an older book or a newer one, a lot of times stuff doesn't change much. That's
true.
Still got the classics, and you still got the seminal sightings, Unless we discovered it, well, the book still stands as, investigating the mystery. So there's plenty of good books.
That's a solid list. I'm going to have that in the show notes for sure. But that'll get anyone getting into cryptozoology on the right foot. Thank you for that.
And I have to stress that books are a great way to do it. I see a lot of misinformation on blogs and websites, and when you start looking at those blogs, half that stuff has been copied ad nauseum from Lauren Coleman, which it gets worse and worse. It's like books are real research, and the internet is, I see comments and quotes, and there's if you go look at an article on Momo, it's like, that's, some of it's in there is okay, some of it has errors, but my book is the place to go if you're really looking at Missouri cryptids and want to know about Momo. The books are the way to go.
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. The last kind of like we're in the July 4th, and you've got the fireworks going off at the end. The last questions here. So what is Bigfoot according to you? What do you think Bigfoot is?
Well, I just kind of stick with the ground floor basic assumption that it is some sort of a biological entity, some sort of ape hominid species that we just simply haven't been lucky enough to prove yet.
Exactly.
I don't buy much into I definitely don't buy into there from UFOs for a lot of reasons. That doesn't make sense. It's cool to think about that, but it just doesn't make sense. And the whole interdimensional stuff, popping out of portals, like, will they conveniently pop out in wooded areas where a creature like this would be, and it's so terrestrial in description and so much like us and our the great apes, that it just doesn't seem like it's popping in and out. And if so, why doesn't it pop into a Walmart parking lot?
Oh, that's funny.
Although, I've seen a few. I thought I had a Bigfoot sighting in a Walmart parking lot, but it wasn't.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. But so I just kind of stick with that kind of John Green classic. This is some sort of there's not a bunch of different species. They're all just derivatives of adaptations for particular environments, but it's some sort of an ape.
Agreed. Is Mothman good or something else?
I think the creature in itself, we're the ones that give it a mantle of good or evil.
Ooh,
I think it just simply is. It is if it's real or if it's biological or what have you, it was just simply there. It was seen by people and then interpreted in the way that people wanted to interpret it. But I don't think, by its own nature, it's neither good or evil.
Okay. That's a cool take on it. I like that. Have you seen any of the photos or the videos about the pale crawler humanoids that have been showing up in different places, like the rake? Have you ever seen any of those?
I've seen some of that.
Okay.
Those realms, I'm neither convinced that those creatures exist or that they don't. A lot of times when I see videos, I'm more inclined to say that I doubt the video, but that doesn't mean I doubt the veracity of people's reports of seeing these strange things.
Yeah.
There's so many things out there in the world that we don't have the answer to, or we don't know. Many creatures that are that kind of a format. Mothman would be included, and rake and things like that, where we can't discount other paranormal factors that we don't quite understand. So I don't ever claim to know the answers. I just continue that investigative journalism approach to try to find out as much as I can what might be the truth.
I like it. Do you have any thoughts on there being window areas in certain parts of the U.S.?
There's some validity to that because there are areas that are just seem to have a lot of high strangeness. You know,
Yeah.
the Bridgewater Triangle, or
Yep.
some of these swamps that I talk about in Sinister Swamps, you know, Dismal Swamp and the Hockomock Swamp. And they're just, it's like, man, why is there so much weird stuff going on in this one area? And that leads to the speculation that there is some sort of a something special about that, a window or whatever you might want to call it, or just the way the Earth's magnetism crosses in that one area. That
That's a good one, man. Yep.
they
I've heard
give
that.
it
That's yeah.
some give
Yep.
it some weirdness. So yeah, I mean, I think there are places that just have an abnormal amount of phenomenon that you can't just dismiss out of hand.
Last but not least, what is your top evidence for Bigfoot?
I think footprints would be,
Okay.
you know, the best evidence we have of Bigfoot, and certainly of any other cryptid, because in many cryptids we don't have any, you know, solid evidence. So the footprints represent something that we can begin to enter into the catalog of saying that these creatures could be real. They're leaving footprints. And while not every Bigfoot footprint I've ever seen is, you know, legit, there are a number of those that I believe are. There's a cast from Elkins Creek, Georgia, made back in the 90s by a deputy sheriff, which I find hard to dismiss from the story and interviewing the guy and from the location. There's you know, Cripplefoot Bigfoot.
Oh yeah, sure.
The Hereford Bigfoot. There's just several of these kind of iconic footprints that I think defy rational explanation and are not easily proved as hoaxes. So those give us sort of the, I guess, the breadcrumbs or the proverbial carrot dangling that we should continue to research Bigfoot because there's a good possibility it exists.
Oh, I love that. That is a really cool way to take that question. Nice, very nice. Well, Lyle, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight and sharing a little bit behind the scenes and going over cryptozoology, all this good stuff. Do you mind sharing with the listeners like what's the best way to keep up to date with what's going on and all those different things?
Yeah, certainly. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been fun.
Yeah,
definitely hit up lyleblackburn.com. That has info and links to all the things involved here, from Ghoultown and to where you can get my books, which is mainly Amazon. They come in paperback, hardback, Kindle, and as well the Small Town Monsters movies. You can view those primarily on Amazon Prime streaming video. If you just search Lyle Blackburn on Amazon, it'll come up with the video, you know, the movies, the books, and all that sort of thing. And then definitely follow me on my Facebook page, Lyle Blackburn Author. You know, I post there all the time, and even on Instagram.
Very cool. Very cool. Definitely link all that in the show notes as well. Lyle has agreed to hang on for a few extra minutes after this episode, share a few stories, and you can access that in the Bigfoot Society Patreon, patreon.com/Bigfoot Society. You can support the podcast for $5 a month. Thank you for that, Lyle. And thanks for listening all. And we'll hang out with you next week. Thanks for coming on, Lyle.
You bet. Thanks.